All right, hello everyone. That was a surprise hat that wasn't on before the countdown started. Welcome to this week's edition of A Sip of Knowledge with Marty Duffy, Liz Rhodes, and Lou Bryson, plus this week's special guest, Michael Swanson of Far North Spirits, who I will let your hosts give a more formal introduction to in just a moment. Before we get started, I'm Will Hookinga from Savvy.co. Just want to point out a few different ways you can interact with your hosts and their guests today throughout the presentation. So on your right, you'll see a chat box. Feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're joining from. You see Brad from Panama, Cheri, also from Minnesota, Christina in Berlin, Carla in Canada. Nice to have you all here today. If you have a question at any point during the presentation for Michael or for any of our hosts, there's a button at the bottom of the screen that says Ask a Question. Just hit that button, type it in down there. I'll be keeping an eye out for those. And last but not least, there's a share button at the top that makes it easy for you to invite your friends to join us for the presentation today. But with all that said, Marty, Liz, Lou, I'll turn things over to you now.
Thanks, Will. Could you turn the heat up? We're so far north today. Freezing. Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Duffy. I am a former senior master of whiskey for Diageo's Whiskeys. Also national brand ambassador for Benedictine, yes, the French liqueur. And for 6 years was co-producer of the Chicago Independent Spirit Expo. And for the last 6.5 years, oh my God, I don't have one on me. What the fuck?
What?
That right there, those, yeah. Glencairn, I am the North American representative, so even in your country, Mike, I am the representative, far north.
I can't believe you don't have a glass. I've seen you come up with a glass when you were wearing a Speedo. I just don't know.
Yeah.
Happily, I'm kidding.
Great. Amazing. I'm actually drinking from a Chicago Independent Spirits Expo.
Look at that. Were you there?
So, shall I continue? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today's talk. I'm Liz Rhodes, technical distiller and spirit consultant. Have just over a decade of experience in the alcoholic beverage space, spanning across a couple different substrates and products, including beer, rum, vodka, but my particular favorite and expertise is in whiskey, which is what we're all here to talk about every Tuesday, which is awesome. I spent most of my career at Diageo, but now I'm currently founder and principal at Spirit Safe Consulting. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what I have going on and what Spirit Safe Consulting is about, if you scroll down to the About the Host section, there's a little link to my website. So give it a little click, check it out. Lou?
Thank you, Liz. I'm Lou Bryson. I'm a whiskey writer. I spent 20 years as the managing editor of Whiskey Advocate magazine. And now I am a senior drinks columnist for the Daily Beast website and the author of recently named Best Overall Whiskey Book, Whiskey Masterclass. Thank you very much. Yay.
I think my book's with a glass.
Probably. And today I'm drinking the Clacton Creek Rebel Rouser, 100% rye at 100 proof. This shit's awesome. It's drinking really good.
Excellent.
Awesome.
I'm Mike Swanson. I'm the co-owner and head distiller at Far North Spirits in Hallock, Minnesota.
I really like that call.
Thank you, Mike, so much for being on our show today. So for those of you who are just turning into the show, for the whole month of February, I've been doing a little technical takeover on A Sip of Knowledge. So we've had some fabulous guests on over the last month. If you missed out, we had Dr. Pat Heist talking about yeast and fermentation earlier this month, as well as Andrew Webrink talking about wood and maturation. Last week, we had Martin Laberge from my former employer at Diageo talking about distillation. So if you missed all of those, feel free to check them out on any one of the places to do that, including YouTube or Facebook, or hey, you can check them out on my blog. on my website. So feel free to check that out. But today we're really excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is Cicali Cereal. So we're going to be talking about some rye today, which is awesome. Mike Swanson is here on to talk about that. A little bit about Mike, and I know we're going to dig in more. He's going to give us a little background on how he arrived to where he is today and how what his distillery is about and what he's doing, including a sneak peek into some of his rye research that he's been doing over the past few years, as well as talk about his Seed Vault series and a smattering of other topics, I'm sure, because this is a sip of knowledge and we don't tangent at all. That's we do. So Mike, a little taste, he grew up as a farm kid and then decided to move on from that in his early career as a corporate marketeer. And then probably one day decided, hey, you know, that farm life, like ag, let's get back into that. But
Go back to
a twist on it instead of just saying, let's his roots. Yeah, thank you.
Roots, whatever sprouts out of them.
Yeah. Sorry, Liz, please.
Yeah,
no, it's okay. It's okay. This is what we do. So instead of just going back to the farm, he said, what if we did a farm-inspired distillery? Which is awesome because one of my favorite things about the whiskey making process and about whiskey in general is that it is rooted in agriculture. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate people like you really digging back into that. I'm sorry again with the puns.
Oh my God.
I'm just on a roll. So in 2013, he actually co-founded what is Far North Spirits. And as he said, it's Hallock, Minnesota. So far north, and you get this question a lot, right? And we talked about this ahead of the show. How far is far north?
How far north is it?
Yeah. So
go ahead, Mike.
25 miles from, it's 25 miles from Canada and about 15 miles from North Dakota. So way the hell out.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
How far, but you're really far. You look on the map, and you're a distance from, say, Minneapolis, like any kind of places where people gather.
Yep.
Are you
We're
closer to Winnipeg or
Winnipeg, Manitoba than we are to Minneapolis?
crap?
Yeah, it's about 400 miles from Minneapolis.
400 miles.
Yeah, 400 miles northwest.
Dude,
That's the way
dog sled in the winter. Do you guys have when they snows up there? Are there snow plows, or do you have to get the dog sleds out?
We got rid of the dog sleds just a couple years ago.
Okay, you're gonna be sorry.
But I think what is actually great about that location is rye, right? Rye is winter hardiness. Rye is grown in Canada. Fourth generation farmer. Not only is he doing a lot of cool things, nerdy things, which we'll get into, I'm sure, with rye, but you have a lot of sustainability cues with how you built your distillery and what's going on the farm. So please, everyone.
We built the distillery on my family farm. So as where I'm standing right over there is, on the other side of this wall, basically, is the house where I grew up. And so where the distillery sits was a wheat field 8 years ago. And so when we're that close to production, you don't have to ship grain. And so the cornfield is 88 steps from the still. It's literally like it's right here. And that was the idea, was we wanted to make something cool out of something we grew on the farm. Because if I made another PowerPoint presentation in corporate, I was going to lose my mind. So that was it. And so, I was in business school when I got the idea to build a distillery. So it was a lot of fun putting it together, but it's been even more fun to build and develop. So it's been a good time.
Mike, is that your tasting room right there that you're sitting in?
It is.
So do you get, you're making me dizzy.
Wow,
Oh, wow.
nice.
That's bigger than I thought.
Yeah.
Wow.
With your little pendant lights. Yeah, those are nice.
So do you get a lot of visitors going far north
Yeah. Well, pre-pandemic, the cocktail room, we had the cocktail room open on Saturdays. And we would get, it's surprising how far away, you get visitors from. We'd have people from the Twin Cities, from Chicago, from all over the place, from Canada. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. But you put a cocktail room in the middle of a wheat field, and people actually show up. It's kind of wild. So it was a good time.
You're like the Kevin Costner of distilling. Yeah. Build it and they shall come.
Are there a lot of educational bits that happen from a touristic perspective? I mean, I don't know, like how many people arrive to you that have been on a farm or know it all.
It really kind of runs the gamut. I mean, we see people that haven't been on a farm before, haven't been in a distillery before. And then, we have people come in and they've been to dozens of distilleries and have been over to Ireland and Scotland and, done the whiskey trail in Kentucky and things like that. So it's kind of all over the place. It's the whole spectrum.
I feel bad thinking this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I grew up next to a farm. I know I'm not like a city guy, but I can't help thinking that, I just have this impression that even people who grew up in Minneapolis like somehow know about a farm because they're in Minnesota. And I'm sorry I said that. I really am.
Trust me, that's not true.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, Lou, I live in Chicago. If you head south, not that far.
That's true. Yeah, you're in cornfields pretty quick.
Cornfields all over the place. Yeah. In fact,
Plainfield.
Or an hour west is Whiskey Acres, and believe me, that is cornfields. I just looked it up, Mike. You are 11 and a half hours from me. If I were to start driving right now.
Yep. Wow. I did drive.
And I know Cheri is joining in, and she said, go to Fargo, take a right.
Yep.
Ed, put the hammer down.
Well, now, being up there, and I am sorry if I get this picture that you're kind of isolated. I'm sure there's other farms and they're casual passerbys, people heading out west, settlers and stuff. But does that make it hard to get your stuff to market, or is that a little more expensive?
Not really. I mean, with I-29 being as close to here as it is, our freight rates aren't much more. I mean, it did take some getting used to train some of our vendors to realize that we weren't just outside of Minneapolis. We were actually away. And but really, I mean, beyond that's been an easy part of the puzzle. Is the trucking and shipping and stuff like that. I mean, it adds a day in most cases, but you just kind of learn to work with it.
And has being up there during this past year, I mean, has it taken? I mean, I know all distilleries have taken a hit to one degree or another, but you were a destination place. So was it really? I mean, did you guys really take a hit? Because it's not like you have a bunch of foot traffic.
I mean, it's not like we were used to or dependent on foot traffic. I mean, let me just show you. I can show you why that's the case.
I'm getting motion sickness.
Oh, this is awesome.
So there's our neighbors. So
what are those?
There we go.
Is that orchard?
That's aspen trees.
Oh my God, you're in Colorado?
You can see our closest neighbor is about 2 miles away. And so our way of life didn't really change that much during the pandemic. I mean, we were sanitizer. We were, we were kind of going on as usual for the most part, because our model was all distribution. We didn't have a huge component of our business being the cocktail room. And so we were lucky that way, because a lot of guys got hit really hard. A lot of distilleries got hit, and we were fortunate that way. All our stuff was going through our distributors, so that was good.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think here in Chicago, some of the distilleries that were in the city actually probably suffered the most because there's so much lockdown in the cities, and especially the big cities, as opposed to, you go out to Whiskey Acres or one of these ones that are out in the middle of a cornfield, and there's a little more freedom.
Yeah, it changed up brewing a lot. A lot of the brewers were on taproom model, and that was. I mean, you read those what's the trends for 2020 articles that were written in January, and they were all taprooms. Taprooms going to be huge this year.
Yeah. Nostradamus wasn't writing those articles.
Well, and and Cheri's reminding me now that that was one of the first things when Dave Pickerell came up here. That was one of the first things he said when he got out of his car, as he looked around and he was like, "Man, y'all could watch your dog run away for 3 days up here." Because it's flat as a table. So.
Yeah, there should be little plaques. Dave Pickerell distilled here. Pickerellisms.
Yeah.
I started doing that with little wooden plaques for me, but nobody keeps them.
Oh,
So, Mike, for those we've got a large kind of international, audience base. For those not maybe so familiar with the distillery, do you want to do a little rundown of what you guys have going on and
Sure.
what it's all about?
Well, we're primarily a rye whiskey distillery. We grow the rye and the corn we use to make the spirits. We're basically a regional expression of whiskey because the malt barley comes from an hour away. I buy barrels from 2 cooperages in Minnesota. And like I said, I grow the other grains. And so our whiskeys are definitely regional expressions. And that's our main focus. But we also make a couple styles of gin. We make 3 kinds of rum just for fun. My last corporate gig had me in the Caribbean and Central America quite a bit. And so I really developed a respect and a taste for rum. And so it doesn't fit with our field to glass thing at all, but rum's fun. And I had a now, so I'm making rum. But no, we focus on our whiskeys, and that's been what our biggest sellers have been, and it's been going well.
I really like that. I was looking at your website, and I like what was said about the character of rye. I know it's like pure anthropomorphizing, but talking about rye being aggressive and like kicking weeds out of the way as it grows, and as a grain, I love it. I mean, not just the whiskey it makes, but the way the damn stuff grows is awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of what I've told people, is that from a crop perspective, it's kind of the equivalent of raising bison. Like they're tough, they're well adapted. They can.
And you can't tell them anything. That's
It's
luckily there's not big rye stampedes. No,
that would be a little weird. Yeah.
Well, it's a really hardy. You're right. It's a really hardy crop. You plant it in the fall. It goes dormant. It overwinters. You can have no snow on the fields at all, and it gets down to 20, 25 below, and it'll still come back up in the spring. And
I've talked to rye farmers, and they tell me it's more a matter of how you try to not have it grow.
Yeah. It's when we first started growing it, one of the first questions my dad asked me was, "Now, how do we kill it next year?" And so, because it's super aggressive, it's just.
The first time I ever went to a rye farm, I was in Alberta, and we walk onto the farm, and I saw, 8 stalks of rye growing out of about that much dirt in a tractor scoop. I'm like, what the hell is this thing?
Well, last fall, it's kind of funny you say that, Luke, because last fall we have bins out front of the distillery where we store the grain, and we were just going to plant rye, and Dad was asking me if I'd done my germination tests, and I said, well, here's what grew that we spilled into the gravel, so I think we're good. because it took off in rocks. So it's like
Damn.
it's tough stuff.
Crop rotation is a big thing for you guys, I'm sure, because you're rotating between rye and corn, I presume, or?
No, I have a separate field for corn because I really don't need that much corn, so I only grow about 10 acres of it. And so I rotate corn with flax. And it's some nice organic material in the soil. The flowers are pretty. It's a nice crop in between corn crops.
So you're just plowing it in.
Yep.
Flax, yeah.
Well,
okay.
we harvest the flax, of course. And,
okay, all right.
It's flax seed. We harvest it for seed, not fiber. And so we harvest the flax seed and then work it in, work in the straw.
Mike, do you get your where do you get your grain malted? Is it at Roar? I visited that outside.
The first couple of years I bought from BSG, and then a farmer opened a malt house in Crookston, Minnesota. It's about an hour south. And it's called Vertical Malt, and he's a barley farmer that has a malt house, and I'm a rye farmer that has a distillery, and so we get along great. And so all my malts from him are custom malts, and he sells to mainly to breweries, but he sells to a few of us distillers as well. So my 100% rye is 95% rye and 5% rye malt, and I send him my rye, and he malts it and sends it back, and it's a great deal.
And you throw a couple bottles in there, right?
Yeah, we do barter. We barter.
And what kind of stills do you use? Where'd you?
So I have a 500-gallon Vendome hybrid pot still, 8-plate column, and I've got a 50-gallon Vendome gin still, just for our gins. But yeah, it's a classic. It's exactly the same setup at Whiskey Acres.
No,
really?
We both hired Dave, and so we got identical setups.
Oh, look at that!
Yeah.
Wow, it looks alien in this picture.
The gin, are you distilling or are you using GNS?
So we use a little bit of both.
Okay.
I distill the botanicals with GNS. I didn't for the first 2 years, it was more than 2 years. First 4 years, I made my own GNS from rye. And then I decided I wanted to live past the age of 50, and so I started buying GNS to distill the botanicals.
Yeah.
But then I
mean, the guys that make it really good, right?
And then I still add back some of the rye GNS for mouthfeel.
Oh, nice.
But the distilling these days is GNS. It's so much cleaner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's dig in to some rye discussion.
Okay. She can't wait to get on the grain here.
She's been
Gin is great.
waiting on a big piece of rye, just thinking.
So I know when you originally, 2013 decided to open up the distillery, you decided to land on EC Hazlitt, a particular type of varietal, which is a traditional cross pollinator versus a hybrid species. Grows really well in Canada. I know you mentioned, you're 2 hours from Winnipeg, 3 hours from the Gimli Crunroll distillery, and I know that Hazlitt grows well there.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk a little bit about why you landed on Hazlitt and how you steered away from Hazlitt as well?
Yeah. So I looked at the most recent rye trials from the University of Minnesota. I talked with our small grain specialist from the U of M up here, and I just kind of looked at a couple of key things that I knew were going to be important. Winter hardiness, obviously, because our climate is really harsh here. But because it's so flat and open, like I showed you, resistance to lodging was really important because we have high winds, we have wicked thunderstorms during the summer. And so you can lie down, a tall variety of rye is going to lie down in a thunderstorm and you might lose your crop. And so Hazlitt is a shorter variety and it has really strong stalks. And so it was hardier for this climate for a couple of different reasons. And then it was a decent yielder as well. It wasn't the top yielder in the trials, but it was a decent yield. And so it was kind of the sweet spot for what I was looking for. And I had to go up to Canada to get the seed.
Right.
Had to go up to Holland, Manitoba to get the seed. And then it distilled beautifully. It has a nice big fat vanilla note. And I thought that was just, what rye tasted like. And then I found out later that no, it's kind of unique.
There's all these different expressions of it and variables to the process outside of the field and the varietals. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because a seed dealer isn't going to be able to tell you what it tastes like coming off a still. Yeah. They just don't have that information. They can give you all kinds of agronomic data, but they can't give you flavor. And so, I just assumed it was all going to be the same because it's a commodity, right? And so I was distilling it for a couple of years, and then I got a call from a farmer in Maine, and this guy was looking for Hazlitt specifically, and he was asking me if I could sell him some seed because he said he couldn't find it anywhere east of Saskatchewan, and his distillers that he was growing for were asking for it specifically. And I said, well, just out of curiosity, why are they looking for Hazlitt? Is it because you're in Maine and a climate thing? And he said, no. He said, my distillers are telling me that the variety not stated, or VNS rye they're getting from their grain merchants, is too spicy, and it doesn't have enough of a vanilla character. And I thought that was interesting, but I had no idea. And I was like, well, geez, I wonder if somebody must have researched this. And so I started looking up, who had maybe looked at flavor coming off the still, and I couldn't find anything. And I asked our small grain specialist if he'd seen anything, and he said no. And he said, I've never heard of that being done. And he said, you should do a crop research study. And so we applied for a grant from the Minnesota Department of Ag, and we got it, and away we went. So I grew 14 different varieties of rye plus triticale. And then I grew them all in 1 acre test plots, so I'd have enough to distill. And then we milled, mashed, fermented, and distilled them all using the same procedure, same enzymes, same yeast. And then put the white whiskey distillate in front of as many noses and palates as we could. And we started to see differences pop between just based on variety alone. We were seeing, pretty radically different flavors coming off the still. They behave different in the cooker throughout the whole process too. And so the results of this study are going to be published very soon. We're just putting the finishing touches on it. But as far as I know, this is the first of its kind that's been published. Now, some of the big boys might have done this research and it's proprietary. But to my knowledge, it hasn't been published before. So we're coming out with that very soon.
Yeah. So I think, sort of resonates with me. I mean, rye, I think only within the past maybe 5 years has it really gained traction. And I think before then, right, you're talking to a seed dealer or something like that, and they don't really know how that translates into application outside of feed or bread, right? And agronomics around that. And I think it was really considered a Wild West. It's a cover crop. It's, it's whatever.
Yeah.
It's what I'm using quotations for that, but
do people use it for animal feed?
A little bit. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So actually that's a good question, because as I understand, a lot of the hybrid ryes that are coming out specifically through, Germany as well, in Central Europe, is again, the intention is, well, we're doing some hybridization. We're developing these strains specifically for these applications, which aren't brewing and distilling.
Right. Well, a lot of the, some of the hybrid varieties that we brought over from Germany, when you look them up, they were developed. Some of them were developed for forage, and as well as cover crop, because we were talking earlier how aggressive that stuff is, and how it grows fast, it chokes out weeds, and so it makes a good cover crop in areas that are really susceptible to erosion, and so it's really useful there. And then apparently it's useful to have livestock on it, just eating the green rye. But it also makes fantastic whiskey. So there's all kinds of good stuff.
One of the things that I've seen specifically is with hybrids that they can have a larger pentosan or fiber content. And that's specifically going to be beneficial for livestock.
Yeah.
Right, as a prebiotic or as nutrition. But as we know, as distillers,
mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, and, what I found is that the hybrids and our small grain specialist, his name is Joachim Wiersma, and he's originally from the Netherlands, and what Joachim was telling me was when they do the hybrids genetically, they're going to be a lot more homogeneous out in the field. They're going to be consistent height. They're going to have a consistent fruiting, flowering, and everything. And the whole thing about hybrids is they're more consistent. Open pollinated varieties have more heterogeneity in the field, and so they're different heights. They do different things. And you just have a little bit more variability. We found with flavor that the newer hybrids tend to resemble each other coming off the still and coming out of the barrel. They have
the different hybrids all tend to taste the same. Is that?
Well, not exactly, but close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Brisetto and Bono taste kind of similar to each other. But what we found was, there's all this variability in the white whiskey, and that's in the study. But then we put all these white whiskeys we put it all in barrels, and we aged them in 15-gallon barrels from the barrel mill in Avon, Minnesota. The barrels all came from the same cooperage, like I said. They all were coopered on the same day during the same shift. And so we put them on the same rack. And then we aged them all for 18 months, and we got radically different flavors. And I was thinking that the barrel was going to roll over those differences in the white distillate. But what we found is the barrel amplified the differences in flavor.
Yeah.
And especially with the older open pollinated varieties, we saw a huge variability in flavor. And some of them, we had one variety from Oklahoma that it had notes that would remind you of like a Highland single malt. It had some Scotch notes there. And then there was a variety from Wisconsin called Spooner, and it was gorgeous coming out of the barrel, and it was terrible going in.
Oh no.
And some of the varieties, you taste them coming out of the barrel, and I was like, oh man, because I didn't want to grow that crap again. And they were terrible in the field, they were terrible in the cooker, they were terrible coming off the still. They came out of the barrel and they were fantastic.
Those bastards.
Well,
Damn you.
Damn
you for being good.
So now I got to go friggin' Spooner again. But, it was one of those things where we just didn't see it coming, but it was a really fun thing to discover.
Well, how much of that, though, Mike, was you're chalking it up to the various grains, the various rye, or how high are you stacking your barrels? What kind of a environment are these barrels aging in up there?
Yeah. Well,
what size are you using?
For the study, it was 15 gallons.
It's 15. That's what I thought. Yeah. Okay.
15s. Yeah, I wanted to get the study out, and so I didn't want to wait 5 years for a 53. But we put them on the same height on the rack because I thought the important thing is maybe not where they are on the rack, but that they're all in the same place. right? So I'm not predetermining a result based on top rack versus bottom of the rick, that kind of stuff. Our aging room isn't climate controlled. So it's cold in the wintertime. It gets warm in the summer. The humidity levels go all over the place. I mean, we see 130 degrees between January and August difference in temp. Coming up on this time of year, like I was telling you guys before we got on the call, I mean, we swung 74 degrees in a week. And we'll go from 30% humidity up to 80, and sometimes within 24 hours. And so we see all this variability in our aging room. And so we subjected them to all of that. So they all saw the same stuff. But then we saw these just crazy differences in flavor. It was a lot of fun to discover.
So, yeah, and I guess a question around that, agronomics versus application. What does that Venn diagram look like from a farmer and a distiller's perspective?
Well, what we're finding is that the variety, when it comes to rye anyway, the variety is a really predetermined factor in flavor.
Yeah.
Like we treated them exactly the same. We used the same yeast stream. We used the same enzyme package from Novozymes.
I mean, in the field too, right? I mean, it's the same.
Yeah, they had equal treatment, and the test plots were all grown the same way. It's all the same ground, and so there wasn't. I wanted to control for
a lot of elevation difference, that's for sure.
Yeah,
some was like an Arizona Mesa kind of.
All right.
And so, I went because I wanted to control for all those variables, and so I wanted to see if just the variety alone made the difference. And if everything would have tasted the same, that would have been a good result, because then you would learn that you can grow whatever you want, and you're going to be fine. But what we found was, the variety alone made a big difference, and so now the next step is finding out whether, if you grow the same variety in two different places, do you get a different result?
Right.
That kind of terroir factor that everybody likes to talk about. And there has been some research done since we started the study. There was a group that did some research on corn, and it's I believe it was Arnold, Ochoa, and company et al. And they did some research on just on dent corn, and what they found is that where they grew the I keep looking at
I just quickly wanted to reference
bingo
book.
I thought that's at the terror of whiskey. I was like, made a horror book out of whiskey.
So might continue, but I just wanted to quickly grab.
And so what he was finding, if I'm understanding his study properly, what he's finding is that where you plant corn is a more influencing factor than the variety. Now, to be fair, we right now in the U.S. we don't use a lot of different varieties of corn. It's pretty uniform, but what he's finding is that he's seeing big differences based on where they're planted. And with rye, we're seeing big differences based on variety. And so there's more research to be done, of course, because it's not a research paper without a call for more research. But we're finding that those varieties really make a difference, and that the grain really matters when it comes to the end whiskey product. And it's been revelatory for a whole host of reasons, but it's pretty cool.
Hey, Mike, there's a Michael Bloom, who I don't know if you've heard or read about, Mike, but he's a local man here, a local boy, made good. Says, I love Far North Spirits, Rocknar, Minnesota Rye Whiskey, currently working with Sherry Cast Finish for my 50stateblend.com project. So
nice.
His whiskey or your whiskey in his blend. But he brings up some that goes to what you're just talking about. Says, any chance that the soil variation in the plots where you grew the variety mattered?
Well, I mean, In this area, no. Our fields are at least close to the farm here, are so uniform in their soil, soil content that we don't see variability between the plots. 2 out of the 3 years, the plots were in the same field, and on the 3rd year, we had to go to a slightly higher place on a field adjacent. So we're talking about, not very far away. And so the soil type was pretty uniform. I was thinking about that when we designed the study, because I didn't want to introduce that variable without being able to, actually study it. And so that's one of the next steps, is what happens now when we put this on. Our soils are very heavy. They're coal black. They're as black as my shirt. And they're alkaline. And so now the question is, what happens if you put this stuff on, rocky, sandy, acidic soil? Do you get a completely different result with the same variety? And it's just, it's more fun stuff to look at.
Go ahead, Lizard.
I know, I was just going to mention, hey, Aaron. Aaron McLeod commented.
Aaron McLeod. Of Clan McLeod.
The grain type variety of rye, Sakali cereal, is not native to North America. Its origins can be traced to southwestern Asia. It was domesticated in the first millennium BC, later than wheat, migrated through cultivation northwards through Russia to Europe, and later brought to North America. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for joining.
How are we getting these eggheads coming to the show?
Yeah, so
what the heck?
Aaron McLeod is the grain geek. So he's also here in New York, but he runs a program for grain quality at Hartwick College, and he's also participated in some tangential rye work coming from this study, some of the varietals that Mike referenced and has worked on. I collaborated with him on some of that as well. So I think at the end of the day, there's, Mike, to your point, like there's a lot of questions we have as either a seed dealer or a farmer or a maltster or, right, the end user, the distiller. And there's just, there's a lot of excitement around this right now, because I think to your previous point is there's not a lot of information and we have all these questions.
No. Well, and and one of the reasons we don't have that information is just the reality of how we've been buying and selling grain, for the last 150 years in the US. I mean, when something is bought and sold as a commodity, when we harvest grain, we bring it to the grain processing facility. We call that an elevator up here. And when it goes to the elevator, it's being mixed in a great big bin with everybody else's grain of the same, if everybody's bringing wheat in.
Yeah, non-specific, right? Non-specific.
Yeah.
As you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so your wheat is going in the bin with the Langens and the Hagens and the Johnsons and the Larsons. And so it's all getting mixed together. And it might be 6 different varieties, but it's all being mixed together in the same bin. And it's sold, on the commodities market for its quality, protein, cleanliness, all that kind of, there's all these quality factors, but the varietal information was lost back at the elevator.
Right.
So that's just the reality of a commodity. And so there's a lot of distillers across the U.S. who are buying their grain directly from farmers, and they have access to that varietal information. But if you're buying it from a grain merchant, there's really not very many ways to trace that back. And so there's some important information that gets lost early in the process, and it's just the reality of our system. And it's interesting to take a look at it, though.
Jer Anderson here asks, is rye native to the U.S.? And Christina Wolf, who is in Berlin, gave him a prompt 9, a.k.a. no.
And that's why Aaron gave this in-depth perspective.
Well, and now, so if rye was now it was the English. This is how I always was told the story. It was really the English and the German immigrants who promoted rye, grew rye, especially in the northern states and up in Canada. But if that's said, and did they bring the grain with them, or they got it? I mean, they had it over in Germany, England. Do you ever think about, hey, I should go over to Germany and see if I can find some ancient rye? Some rye.
I've thought about that, because heirloom is, it's fun to look at heirloom varieties and stuff like that. But because they would have come over with literally a pocket full of seeds or a little bag of seeds,
Weird thing to travel with.
Yeah, it's just, I guess it's what they used to do. But
what's in your pocket?
They would have been coming from Germany, but they also would have been coming from Poland. They grew a lot of rye in Poland as well, and in Scandinavia, because it was you could put rye on your lousiest ground and still get a crop, and it was pretty reliable that way. So, but there's so many varieties of it, but I'm not aware of a lot of ancient rye that's being cultivated. I know there's some, but what Joachim told me, and I mean, part of this is his opinion when it comes to, as a plant breeder. But one of the things he's always told me is that, look, a lot of these varieties get heirloomed for a reason. And it's usually because they had problems. And so if you brought a variety over and, you planted it and it had ergot issues or it had fungus issues or, issues with traits, you might go find a different source of seed. And so things get shunted pretty quickly, but I'm guessing they got to be out there. And I think it's interesting to take a look at.
That's what I think about too, is varietals of barley, for example, that might be very successful in Scotland. That then we think, oh, we'll just plant them over here, but it doesn't really work that way.
It doesn't? But why wouldn't it? I mean,
there are hops that are, and again, I'm going over to the beer side.
Yeah, please.
You grow the same hop in Germany and Idaho, and you get two completely different characters. You may have floral in Germany, and over here it becomes grassy piney, just because of, well, not just because of, but soil, temperature, even latitude.
Well, it's funny. I would just think, though, I mean, the U.S. being so, every state is so very different. Climates are different, and soils. I mean, Mike, you're talking about the black soil of Minnesota. You come down here to Illinois, it looks pretty gray to me down here. So I would just think somewhere in the U.S. you could find a similar area or situation, climate, and
microclimates,
micro something.
Are a thing, and there have been some varietals. I can think of, for example, that grow well in the Mid-Atlantic region that might be coming over from Germany, but they don't do well in other, parts of the U.S. So it is true, but to find that, there's a lot of research. Like growing a crop is a lot different than, running a fermentation or something like that. It's a lot of.
There's a whole background to what happened before that grain arrived at your distillery. And there was a whole host of decisions and choices that went into, that resulted in that crop. And like Christina's saying, I'm noticing on the chat, for ancient varieties for this area, you'd want to look at Russia, Scandinavia, and Poland, just because of climate. Something that was grown, a lot further south is probably not going to do well up here, just because of winter hardiness. But there's some varieties that I've been thinking about growing. One variety in particular from Sweden called Midsummer, that would be fun to grow and see how it does here. But I've been to where our family farm was in Sweden, and it's a lot nicer there than it is here. It's a lot milder.
Really? Damn.
And so it's hilly, and so there's a difference in the geography too.
Christina was just saying for ancient varieties, you're better off looking into Russia, Scandinavia, and Poland, as you mentioned.
Yep.
I was actually at a what was it, like an ancient brewing seminar in Williamsburg a couple of years ago, and they were talking about finding rye in archaeological digs and granaries in Crete, and it wasn't like a full granary of rye. It would be like a granary of einkorn or some other like early wheat variety, and then there'd be about 1% rye because you just couldn't stop the shit. But it was there, and they said they didn't start finding like whole things of rye for hundreds of years later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For as sturdy as rye is, how come it doesn't do well in the lower states, in warmer states, warmer climate?
It's on vacation. It's just hanging out. Too lazy.
It's just kicking back.
Kind of like a Canadian
Socks
in
rye,
Florida.
sunglasses.
Bothered.
I think Mr. McLeod would have a good answer for that, but it would seem to me that because it evolved as a winter crop, as it traveled north, it became a northern breed, and so I don't it doesn't do as well in the heat.
Hey, did your farm always? I mean, what were your family originally growing on the farm in the past?
So my grandpa grew wheat and barley, but he also grew quite a bit of flax back in the 50s. And because they used to use the fibers for cigarette papers, and we used to smoke a lot back then, so that was a good business.
It sounds kind of healthy. Healthy cigarettes. Nowadays, you go to Whole Foods to get your flax.
Yeah. But it was mainly wheat, barley, some flax, and then there were some guys around here that would grow sunflowers. And then getting into the 60s and 70s, we started growing sugar beets in the Red River Valley, and that took off pretty big. So now most of the rotations that we're growing now we still grow wheat, but we rotate in soybeans and canola with the rye. So we plant the rye into canola stubble, and then we grow soybeans after the rye. So there's a rotational component there.
It looks like you're going to have to meet up with Christina. She says they have a.
Yeah, she sounds pretty on this, right?
Yeah,
that sounds really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if everyone's seeing this, but Christina says that each university over there in Germany has varieties of typical plants. Typical? Is that different from typical? Their own region, and here in Europe exists few much bigger ones.
So that's something also that's sort of like a side conversation, but we talked about heirlooms. So isn't that sort of how Jimmy Red came back right through
Jimmy Red, Buddy Butcher?
Yep.
I know the guys at Whiskey Acres they've played around with some Oaxacan green dent and some blue corn, and they're doing a lot of the same stuff with corn that I've been doing with rye. And so it's a good question, Liz, because Mr. McLeod is asking how much are you willing to trade functionality for flavor, and the short answer is quite a bit. Because I'm not under
at your level,
I'm not under pressure for huge yields.
Yeah.
Like if I get 20 bushels to an acre, I can grow enough to make some whiskey out of. And so it's why I'm willing to grow Spooner and Oakland again, is because the flavor was so unique and so good that I'm willing to grow that stuff again and kind of fight with it, because I know it's gonna result in some decent whiskey. So it's in our situation, we can have some fun with it because I don't have to produce a couple million cases of whiskey from it. I can grow it small and grow 10 acres of it and have a good time with it. So I can play with all kinds of stuff. And that's the plan going forward, is we'll have a seed vault release just about every year. and it'll be a different variety every year. And it'll be it's
exciting.
Way down the whiskey geek rabbit hole, but it's fun.
And that's and Aaron, thank you for asking that, because that's actually what I was going to ask next as well. So, which is the flavor versus yield conversation with protein, and how that not only yield on the field but also yield at the distillery, and how flavor intertwines and all of that. And I think that's a very exciting position to be in. And how many do you anticipate coming out of this Seed Vault series? How many SKUs do you anticipate launching?
Oh man, because I keep, now the more research you do, the more you find out. And then now there's 4 more varieties that I'd like to grow and play with, in addition to the 14 that I already grew. The list just keeps going. And so that's the fun part is that there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And so I couldn't tell you a number of SKUs because, I keep learning about new varieties. So
Mike, would you play around with, so you grow the different varieties, you make a batch with one variety. Now, you can vat those whiskeys once they've matured and play around with that, the different flavors. But would you also say, hey, you know what? I would like to take this grain, and this grain, make its own little moosh, make a mash with it, and go distill it, and play around with the flavor prior to maturation, before distilling. I mean, you play around with that much?
Well, I hadn't thought about that. But now that you bring it up,
about blending grain before mashing?
That's my idea, but I'm giving it to you.
Now I've got to do that too. No, it's actually not a bad idea. If you start blending the grains together, do you see some, what
synergies or
I don't know. Let's plug it in and see what blows up.
Hello. Becomes like a huge seller. All I ask is my name somewhere on the list.
Hey, wait, what
An
was
acknowledgement.
261?
Oh yeah, page 261 in any. And Liz, you mentioned earlier the yield, the field. Name of your next book or your first book.
Ooh,
That's a good one.
Nice.
Yield, field. Boom. Another one. Just
right here on ASOC.
Throwing life preservers up Titanic.
We're good at that. We don't write any of it down, but we just, hop on YouTube one of these days and harvest all this little nuggets.
It's my legacy.
There was one just thought, and maybe this is down the rabbit hole, thinking about all of
why do we keep talking about that other distillery?
What? Oh, rabbit hole.
Oh.
I thought you meant a literal rabbit hole. What do you keep on talking about rabbit holes? Are there a lot of rabbits up in Minnesota?
No, it was just thinking about, and it's back to the heirloom conversation, specifically with corn and how that's really going to progress. And I think about the banks, and this, we talked about bringing seeds over from Europe, but I can't help to think about what, the heirloom varietals of corn are probably what were already here.
Mm.
And so it's sort of, in a way, interesting in how that's coming to a full circle. And
I think there's a ton of great research that's going to be done with corn because it's native to the continent. There's got to be just hundreds of heirloom varieties to play with, and I mean, I don't see any end in sight for me with just rye. And then you look at corn, and that's something that I can't grow much of up here because we're so far north. But you get further south, and there's all kinds of cool stuff they'll be able to do with corn. That'll be a good time. But there's the Delaware Seed Foundation or Delaware Fields Foundation out in Delaware is they're playing around with a variety of rye called Rosen, that was no, I'm sorry, not Delaware, Philadelphia Field Foundation.
Yeah.
It's native to Pennsylvania, or was an heirloom variety in Pennsylvania that is being brought back. And I'm just gapping on the lady's name right now, but
Laura Fields.
Laura, thank you, Laura Fields. And she's bringing this variety basically almost back from extinction, and they've started to distill it. And I'd like to get my hands on some of that stuff too, and see if it grows, how it grows here in Minnesota. So there's all kinds of fun stuff we can do that way.
I'm pretty sure that was originally isolated in Michigan.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah. They were growing it on an island in Michigan. It was brought over from Poland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
You mean one of the little islands near Mackinac and stuff?
Yeah, like out in the lake.
So it must have just been used extensively in Pennsylvania rye.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure Michter's was using it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I think Michigan State, they've been running some rye research as well, and I think they just published recently a little bit from that as well. I was going to ask you about if you've ever played around with a Bruzy, because I know Todd Leopold loves himself some Abruzzi, so I know he sort of swears by it in terms of not only spicy characteristics, but he also talks about the linalool or lavender sort of citrusy characteristics. Have you ever played around with Abruzzi?
I haven't. It's more of a southern variety. I don't. From what I've read about it, I don't think I'd be able to grow it up here.
Okay. Yeah.
Because
Really?
it's conditioned to the southern part of the country. I guess I haven't tried it. I mean, you don't know until you give it a shot. But it hasn't made the list yet, just because it's. I would question its winter hardiness up here.
Right.
I looked it up. It was South Manitou Island in Michigan.
Oh, cool. Okay. Nice.
Yeah. So
nice.
apparently either the state or one of the universities had a research station there because it was an island and isolated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
cool.
Live there.
To answer Graham Fraser's question,
Thanks,
the short answer is both. For all of our whiskeys except the 100% rye, we do use malt barley, but we also use enzymes, mainly for viscosity. If I didn't use enzymes with our rye, I'd have wet cement in the cooker.
Familiar with that?
That's what I was going to ask.
Who knows the drill there?
That's what I was going to ask you. I mean, that's how you're avoiding the mess that rye produces. I mean, I used to hear distillers complain about it all the time. That they loved making rye whiskey. They like the whiskey. They didn't like making it.
The process.
And then they learned the Canadian lesson.
Well, we do have we do still have a mess.
Yeah. It's not as big of a mess.
But we're Scandinavians, right? We have stubbornness issues, so we just
you just put the goat inside there and let the
Put the
goat.
head down
in concrete. Good.
But no, we can get the viscosity thinned out, with some you got some alpha amylase, you've got some, in like a viscosity package from Novozymes that does a pretty good job. And so you can get it workable with a few different enzymes. They're playing around with a new one now that includes a protease that we saw some pretty good results with. I might include that in the package going forward, but it's essential though, because otherwise we literally would take out mixer motors from how thick it gets.
Wow.
Yeah, it does. We've already gone through a bearing on our cooker learning that lesson. So.
Hey, Mike, you were talking before. You've dealt a lot with the Nick and Jamie at Whiskey Acres.
Mm-hmm.
Being a farmer, do you seem to, have a little more interaction with other farm distillers?
Yeah.
You guys join
like a coalition, or
we just kind of do. We haven't like formed a coalition, but like there's one other farm distiller in Minnesota, and he's at the exact opposite corner of the state, and that's Christian at Rock Filter. and he's a farmer with a distillery as well. He grows more corn, and so he's playing around with bourbon quite a bit more. But yeah, I've talked to the guys at Whiskey Acres a lot more during our earlier days when we were still trying to figure out what the heck we were doing. But because we had identical equipment setups, we talked quite often. Like, hey, have you figured out what to do with this or what have you? It was, yeah.
See, I was just thinking maybe you guys, within the American Craft Spirits Association, you create your own little caucus. Just farm
distillery caucus, yeah.
Demanding more rights.
I remember reading like 25 years ago articles about the ultimate craft brewery would be somebody that grew their own barley, and I also remember all of us going, "Yeah, that's not going to happen." Here we are.
Lou, though, how could you? Because that's how so many distilleries, at least over in
Sure.
Here in Canada.
You have to remember when you're thinking about brewing, you're talking about a lot more volume.
Oh, you were talking about breweries.
Yeah.
A lot of barley.
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of barley. I mean, distillers are usually the tail and the dog, and it's the brewers that are driving what the maltsters are doing.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was what I told the first banker was this is the oldest value-added agricultural business in the country. It's the oldest model because it predates the country. So
yeah,
it still works.
Conservation technique as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you take a huge volume of grain, you literally distill it down, and now you've got a product that doesn't spoil and transports easy, and you can use it like cash. So it's kind of the same deal now.
And that's probably goes into some of the other conversations we've had about Johnny Walker and blended whiskey and the grocer model. We did have one last question before we wrap up. Question from Jerry Anderson: is the sticky mash problem particular to rye, or is it an issue with other types of whiskey as well? I'll add my 2 cents. Rye is notorious for being sticky, but if we could up the ante a little bit more, I would say oats. Even worse. Is
that right? I haven't played around with those.
They're also a northern crop, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I would assume that's why the Scottish cuisine is freaking based on oats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, it used to be a big staple in Irish whiskey as well.
Oh, true. Right.
Back in the day.
Because Robert at Koval has played with oat whiskey and millet and a few things like that. Spelt, yeah.
Other obscure grains.
Who's that spelt?
Luckily, as Mike mentioned, exogenous enzymes, I feel like sometimes have a bad rep, but they actually help in a lot of cases for innovation, as Mike mentioned. So we can trial some of these other grains and use them effectively for flavor in mind, but process is inherent, right? We have to first process them before we get a tasty whiskey. So fortunately, we have some tools to use.
There seems to be an almost almost snobbish resistance to using them. I don't know. It seems weird.
Lou, she just said enzymes among scientists, I guess, get a bad rep. I'm going, hello, enzymes? Enzymes get a bad rep. Like people are talking on enzymes back or something.
Just to be clear, I love enzymes.
Some of my best friends are enzymes.
I used to go to school with enzymes.
Real quick, there's a link down below for the website for Far North, so you can go and check that out to learn a little bit more. Publishing.
Great website. I'm sorry. Fantastic website. Really, Mike, whoever set your website up, I love it. Awesome.
Wow.
Well, thank you. That is precisely none of my doing.
Okay.
That's all my wife Cheri and our graphic designer. So
It's one of the few spirits websites that I've not wanted like twitching wanting to edit it. It was awesome.
Mike, you should put that on your website now. This website is endorsed by Lou Bryson, whiskey writer.
I mean, I actually had Lou check out my website before it went live, so I'm saying something.
One of my chopped liver. I never got that call.
Excuse me, word man.
I'm called Mr. Website. A lot of people know. Marty
So we were talking about links, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, but go check it out. Their logo is great too. So if we're on the topic of marketing, the whiskey and the logo and it's all coming together. So you're doing a great job up there, up in the far north. Mike, it was so nice to have you on. Thank you for sharing, giving us a little sneak peek into some of this rye research that you've been doing. It's really exciting. So appreciate you sharing that with us today.
My pleasure.
Next week, of course, because we have the next episode kicking off. The technical takeover is finished. So thanks for joining in.
That was great, Liz. That was a great month. That's a little exhausting. You have to think so much.
Yeah.
But
my hand up so my head doesn't explode from all that.
But next week we have a new guest on, George Grant from Glenfarclas. So that'll be fantastic as well.
The Shrek of Scotch whiskey. That's what they call them. The Shrek of Scotch whiskey.
One of my favorite Scotches.
Yeah.
I like Glenfarclas.
The link is also on the chat, so be sure to give it a little click and sign up.
Give us some love.
And Mike, so you know, Lou Bryson has a dog sled of his books, full of his books, heading over to you right now. And the dogs all have little barrels on their full of rye grain, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Rye grain. Coming your way.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Cheers, you guys.
Good morning.
Cheers.
Bye.